what I'm thinking of, Tony, is this might actually make coaches better, because I think maybe one of the reasons why basketball is so traditional is because coaches have so much time in practice that they just get used to doing the same old drills, and that's literally all they know. Whereas maybe if you had like 3, 4 practices a week, like even in an elite academy, I'm thinking I could easily get everything we needed to do in 4 practices a week. And obviously some of those, like two of those would be like lower intensity. And I think if you're really specific and you have that constraint, maybe it will force you to actually prioritize and create different activities. So I don't know if you've had that experience just in all the coach education you've done.
100%. I look at American football, and I think that so many coaches say, okay, we're going to practice 2.5 hours, which is way too long. And then they start filling those 2.5 hours. And it's very similar to I was a chemistry teacher for 38 years, and we had 55-minute classes. Well, in education, you have to fill that 55 minutes. And as soon as you start filling, you start adding filler. You start adding things that do not pass the test that Bobby Knight told me a long time ago, which every single thing we do in practice needs to be analyzed and put under the filter of, does this help us to win games? Back in the 60s, I don't know if they still do it. My dad would do something called the star drill, where you know, 5 guys made like a star, and there's a line behind each person, and each guy would catch him and pass, and the final guy would shoot a layup and then begin all over again. And it looked kind of nifty, it filled time, but it did absolutely nothing to win games. And so we have all this crap. Great, as you know, great basketball coaches have 100 drills, and probably 98 of them are worthless.
Completely agree. It's completely accurate. So do you ever get problems, Tony, with athletes who, because this is part of the problem, this grind culture, which you mentioned, and all this social media rubbish. So for instance, one of my best players last year in Italy at my academy, we actually did this, and this was when I was influenced with you. We had we called it the low, moderate, high intensity. So same as what you just described a few moments ago. But then the problem I had is this player always wanted to get in the gym on off days, and all of this being like, oh, if I'm not working, someone else is getting better. And it was actually quite difficult to get this message across as to why we're doing this and why it's going to make them better. And I always say, like, you get better doing nothing. But I don't know if you'd have any advice there for the coaches listening to this.
Yeah, I'm big on championship sleep, which is 9 hours a night, which you talk about things being hard. That's the hardest thing a young person will ever do, ever. That's hard work. And I tell my athletes, the sleep's the only time when we heal and the only time when we grow. And if you're not healing and growing, you're not a very good athlete. And I think that it's really hard in today's world when good athletes buy into the grind. And I think it's important to understand why they do. And that's because we've been taught ever since we were born that the team that wins worked twice as hard as the team that lost. So the team that lost would work twice as hard the next week and lose again. And then they'd work 4 times as hard. And it was the starting of a losing streak. Always the default thing was we got outworked, and that ain't going to happen again. Well, one of the things that great athletes do is that they want to claim that all of their success came from their hard work. So they create mythological characters out of themselves. I remote train an elite soccer player from Sweden, and he started watching Kobe Bryant videos about the Mamba mentality and waking up in the middle of the night to practice, and he barely had time to eat, and that he worked 10 times harder than any other NBA player. And so this guy started doing that with soccer, and he got slower, and eventually he got broken, like literally broken physically, because he bought into the mythology of success. And what we need to do is somehow convince kids that the opposite is true, that smart work is the key. And I think the best way to teach these kids, man, if you have data is so important, like time, how high are you jumping? I mean, if you're slow and can't jump, you're not healthy. So you need to always know how fast you are and how explosive you are. But I think we learn best from stories, that all great coaches are master storytellers. Like they talk about something that's true, but they say it in a story-like way. And I think we humans really connect to that.
I definitely see that. And I think that's where it's interesting, where the numbers, it's like the empirical evidence, and it's really useful, and we believe in a lot of that. But then it's, especially with players, I think it's the ability to tell that story, like you said, that's what resonates, and that's what they respect in many instances. So kind of on this topic of rest, something I see a lot, and it's in both Europe and the States, is basketball's become a year-round sport. So, back even a decade ago, I don't think we had that, where kids would play more multi-sports. And that's, I think, the biggest advantage of the American sporting system compared to Europe. But now I think it's negated a little bit because of things like AAU. And then in Europe, the club model, it often means that it's year-round, because then in the summers, they end up doing national teams and there's not much rest. And I think it can be quite dangerous. And a lot of the work I'm doing here in London, Tony, is with just the London Lions Academy. And we have kids from like 11 to 18. And we're looking at trying to completely reframe what is considered normal in the industry. So even things like kids doing different sports, like 1 or 2 months off in the summer. So what would your advice be for coaches who have, good access to their players, in terms of maybe being wary of, keeping the same schedule the whole year round and just doing basketball?
I think that that time off and time outdoors, I think that's huge in basketball. I think that indoor living creates health problems, mental and physical health problems. And basketball is an indoor sport. Now, it didn't used to be. I mean, the summers, the playgrounds were hot, sweaty, sunny, all day long things. And I think that was so good. But to be indoors and to play basketball 12 months a year will break you mentally or physically or both. And you're right. Basketball players like myself benefited from playing quarterback in football and then running track in the spring and playing baseball, because there were different skills. And I think we were able to become a more rounded athlete. And one of the things I like to tell coaches is that this may hurt your feelings, but your sport does not create a better athlete. Now, your sport will, in basketball, let's say, yeah, you be a better shooter, dribbler, whatever. But when I'm talking about an athlete, I go back to that thing: sprint fast, lift heavy, jump high, jump far, bounce. That even if basketball was a kid's only sport, you must separate athletic training from the game. Let the game train the game. I say you need to be general in the weight room, extreme in speed training, and then specific in practice. That specific in practice, I think, is so important. That means stop conditioning, only do stuff that helps you win games, work on the fundamentals of shooting, those things. But away from the game, stop reverse engineering the game. Instead, train kind of like a sprinter in track, who also long jumps and triple jumps, and who also hurdles. Like, I think that track might be the only sport that, done right, would create a better athlete. Mm. But I go back to that thing. It's about those qualities of movement that are so essential to the game. And of course, as you know, a lot of coaches say, yeah, we do work away from basketball, but then when you look at it, it's all like aerobic conditioning and hard stuff.
Exactly.
Repeat sprints are not sprinting. Sprinting is sprinting as fast as you can, being timed, 5 seconds, whatever, taking 5 minutes off. and doing it again. That is sprint training, and nobody does it.
That's it. It's instead that coaches are too busy doing like the punishments and all these runs to losing. Just waste time. That's all it does. Yeah.
It rhymes and detrains athleticism. I mean, not only does your sport, if you do it a traditional way, not only does your sport fail to create a better athlete, it probably detrains that athlete, which is so scary. You're like, what? They can't jump as high, they can't sprint as fast, they get weaker physically. I think that's what happens.
Agree. And I see it too, even with all the long practices. Like for me, a pro team should never be practicing more than 90 minutes. I think it would be ludicrous. And we see it like a lot of practices in Europe would be 2.5 hours. College would be 3 or more hours. And I just can't believe in 2024 we're still seeing that.
And I would say not only 90 minutes, but there needs to be tons of downtime. You know,
Within that, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yep.
I call it my wave theory. We live a wave theory: sleep, awake, sleep, awake. Well, there needs to be a wave theory in practice planning where you go high, low, and inside those high practices, there needs to be like a halftime. There needs to be, you cannot, as you know, every coach wants to be high the entire week, the entire practice, and all there is that there's going to be a decline because you can't be high all the time. So you must constantly have this wave-like thing in practice where every 5 minutes of intensity is followed by a drink and some coaching them up, stuff like that, and then go into another 5 minutes of intensity. And you say, well, games are continuous though. No, they aren't. Basketball games are, like Steph Curry plays 34 minutes in a 2.5-hour game. It is not continuous.
It's so true. And you just got me thinking about this, Tony. I think what happens a lot is coaches go in, especially professionally, and they think they're going to do a low practice, and it ends up completely not being low. Because even if they're doing things maybe without defense, even if there's no defense, they're doing the load and just the amount of time that it ends up actually being moderate. Would you seen that? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And coaches are just, I mean, I've been that guy where if my guys weren't constantly moving for a 2-hour practice or a 3-hour practice or whatever, if they weren't constantly moving, and if there was like downtime, is like, oh my God, if somebody walked in right now, that they would think less of me because my guys are all standing around. So but that creates busy work and fatigue, and we don't win games by doing moderate crap. We win games by practicing at a high level, and you can't practice at a high level for 3 consecutive hours twice a day.